Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Hello there and welcome to the show. This is Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. Well, today's theme is It's Only Hate When You Do It. And we've got some pretty interesting stories to share that give you some examples of how, our fair and balanced media is not so fair and balanced when it comes to things involving hate, racism, CRT, and even, LGBT issues being taught to our kids. So where to begin? Well, let's start with an actual hate crime. I'm sorry, did I say an actual hate crime? Okay, I may have to walk that one back. Last week, the press in Idaho was all over an alleged hate crime that took place at Caldwell High School. But, what's this? Police are saying graffiti at Caldwell High School no longer believed to be a hate crime. I'm resisting the urge to say told you so, but let's continue on. Police are now investigating graffiti sprayed on the outside of Caldwell High School as a gang-related act and do not believe the incident was motivated by hate. Well, finally, some good news. Let's delve a little bit deeper into the story. Caldwell police on Thursday said the vandalism was under investigation as a hate crime per Idaho code. Now detectives believe the graffiti was sprayed as an act of intimidation between two rival Hispanic criminal street gangs. So breathe a sigh of relief, those of you who are especially woke. At least nobody was flexing on the issue of race here. It's just some good old-fashioned criminal street gangs. And I mean, we all can live with that, right? That's a lot easier than somebody writing white power, with hate in their heart. Okay, sarcasm off. 4 people wearing dark hoodies and face masks were seen on security cameras around 1:15 a.m. Thursday morning after arriving in a white 4-door car. Oh, well, maybe the car. Okay, never mind. On Friday, Caldwell police said they now believe 8 people were involved with a second dark-colored truck or SUV arriving at the high school shortly after the first group. So the bottom line is, the incident came 2 days after the students had held a Brown Pride rally at the school. A Brown Pride hoodie was the subject of controversy after a student at Caldwell High was asked to turn the hoodie inside out so the words were not visible. Now, the school district was saying that phrase goes against school policy. The language violates dress code by being gang affiliated. That's why they said we don't want you wearing this particular, hoodie with Brown Pride, on it. But isn't it interesting how quickly the press jumped to the idea, well, in response to someone showing brown pride, which of course really is not that big of a deal, someone came out and committed a hate crime by asserting white power. Oh, and only somebody asserting white pride would be accused of such a thing. And again, the issue here isn't so much does white power exist or is there white supremacy? Of course there is. It's just much less of a problem, I should say, than people would tend to believe, because we have this narrative, and that is that, well, everything bad going on in the world is the product of white supremacy. Everything. And I wish I were joking, but showing up to work on time, yeah, well, that's a white supremacist relic. Okay, taking pride in your appearance or being fit, yep, showing up at the gym, white supremacy, totally. This is just the standard default setting, I guess, for many within the press, and unfortunately, many of the woke enablers who encourage this sort of behavior, that anytime anything happens, why, it's got to have some kind of a racist explanation. And, in this case, no, that really wasn't the case. A couple of street gangs trying to out-intimidate one another, which is not a good thing, but I would argue it's not what the press jumped on. And yes, it was quiet. It was walked back. Well, okay, maybe it wasn't. You saw an example of this in California just a few days ago with the Chinese New Year, the Lunar New Year coming in. Some guy went on a rampage in California, shot 16 people, killed 10 of them or 11 of them, and immediately, what's the conclusion? That opportunists are jumping to? Well, obviously, this is another example of white supremacy, except when the individual was caught after he killed himself, after being cornered by police, it turns out, no, actually, he was Asian himself. So this hate crime targeting Asians turned out to be carried out by an Asian. My point is simply this. Race doesn't matter. Not in the sense that the people who are out there trying to make careers and money on it think it matters. If you're insistent, I have to divide people up, I have to categorize people somehow. First of all, that's collectivist thinking. So, mind your step. You're marching in lockstep with some not very savory ideology there. But secondly, if you have to categorize people, really the only categories that amount to anything are decent or indecent. Is this person a decent person? Is this an indecent person? And guess what? That's not a matter of skin color. It's not a matter of creed. It's not a matter of sexual orientation or anything like that. It's a matter of their behavior. That's how you have to make that judgment. If, in fact, you're into, I've got to categorize everybody. Now, let's piggyback off of this to a recent event that took place at Boise State University. I mean, it was Martin Luther King Day. Everybody enjoys the holiday. And look at this. The Martin Luther King Living Legacy celebration at Boise State included a march, a rally, and a keynote conversation with Dr. Abram X Candy. Well, who in the heck is Dr. Abram X Candy? Well, this is one of the foremost authorities, in quotation marks, foremost proponents of critical race theory. In fact, if you look at some of his writings, in fact, if you've ever read his book, you will see that he believes that there's no such thing as being colorblind. There's no such thing as looking at people and not fixating on their skin color. You're either racist or you're anti-racist, which it turns out is a lot like being racist, but just for the other side. Does that make sense? In other words, you have to be an activist in order to be legit. Nobody can just look at people based on their behavior or on their merits, and say, well, this is a good person. I can see by this person's actions, they're of good character. Everything has to be steeped in race. I'm going to give you an example of this. And then, I know we get all these assurances from people within the education establishment. Jim Jones in particular likes to parrot the idea of, well, we did studies to see if CRT was being taught in Idaho. We could find no evidence of it. Yeah, that's because you were looking for something that was glowing bright red with the word CRT emblazoned on it, and you didn't find that. And yet, Boise State hosts paid $27,500 for the leading proponent of critical race theory to come and speak. So to give you an idea of what exactly does this guy stand for, well, here's a quote from him, from his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. I mean, look, hey, is the goal here to encourage discrimination or is it to discourage discrimination? Because I'm getting kind of a mixed message here. The only way that we can right a wrong is to do more of that wrong and plan on doing even more of it in the future. Now, I want to contrast that with a second opinion here. In fact, let's go to the guy whose legacy was being celebrated on Martin Luther King Day. Ah, yes, Martin Luther King Jr. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Okay, one of them makes sense. The other one sounds to me like race baiting. And again, here's the idea of why was this speaker brought to speak, authoritatively? And boy, I'm telling you, the press, as well as, the people who brought him there from Boise State University. I mean, it was, oh, he's just one of the foremost authorities. And I mean, goo eyes. Wow. But it's kind of a divisive message. And again, this is critical race theory. I know that, at least one Idaho legislator is looking at, hey, by the way, how did you pay for this? Was this done with appropriated money? Because Idaho has law that says you're not supposed to use taxpayer money for racially divisive messages. Now, I don't know what Abram X Candy spoke about. I don't know if his message was something totally different, but what he is known for is, how to be an anti-racist. And it's very racist, the message that he gives. So was it done simply from student contributions, as the folks at Boise State University say? I don't know, but it's very likely that there will be some questions for the president of Boise State University, and maybe it's time to ask some of those questions. My point is simply this. Those who say, why, that's not being taught anywhere in our schools, you're lying. And in fact, I want to share with you a video that illustrates why this insistence that, well, it's not even being taught anywhere, and besides, we don't know that it even exists. Okay, this is a group of Cincinnati school administrators pledging to covertly teach critical race theory, even if it's banned in Ohio. And I want you, this is their own words. Listen to how they say, we're going to get around this.
Should I be able to stay in my position if this law does go through, heaven forbid, then we will be just as like covert in our wording of our. As long as I'm in the seat and don't lose my job over it.
If you have to.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate,
Yeah.
but
Just
if you
change the
have
name,
to.
same thing.
We'll find a way.
If you were to put Be an Antiracist on that.
And that was one of the books that we read actually as a staff. That was one of our book studies.
Do you think they would care about that?
Yeah,
'Cause
absolutely. It's always about using me. You know, it's
right.
It's just around the terms that we use, so that's fine. Okay, we don't need to say that.
Just call it a different thing.
Just call something else.
Yeah.
They're going to do the same work.
We don't have the 1619 project as a part of our curriculum officially, but it is referenced as a resource in several places. We have authors on our recommended reading list that other districts have said don't teach this author.
Like who?
Dr. Abram X Candy. He has a book called Stamped.
Our friends in Texas who are educators are like, there's like 10 ways around it. They write these bills to appease constituents.
Always.
Yeah. So even if it passes, no worries?
I'm not. I really am not.
Good.
You know, even now, I mean, the most recent, I'm sure, DeWine passed the bill for teachers to receive like 24 hours of training and they can carry. I'm here. I mean, our superintendent came out with a whole statement on it. It's like, I'm going to tell you that's not going to happen. I mean, you could, again, he has conversations with the board.
Yeah.
Good. But.
So even though the governor said one thing,
Because it's local decision. It really is a local decision. So he can pass it, just like anything else that he passes. But it's up to the local government, which is our governing board, the board, to decide whether or not. I think you'd have a lot of educators, especially in this area.
So even if they did that CRT ban thing locally, they'd be like, not for us?
There's enough for us to not call it that.
Wow. That's pretty bold. Now, I know some are going to say, well, Brian, this was in Ohio. Nothing like that is happening in Idaho. Really? Are you sure about that? Because I have a sense that if it's happening in Ohio, it's probably happening in other places. Now, that doesn't mean that every educator is on board for this. But if people are willing to bend the law and, wink, wink, we'll just call it something different in other states, what's to stop that from happening here? I feel like it's a shell game, maybe a rhetorical shell game. And, well, it's not CRT if we don't call it that. But the bottom line is there are some really interesting left-wing divisive ideologies that are being brought to the table. And maybe they're being brought in the teachers' training, and they're not exactly in the textbook, but they're still there for the teachers to teach their students. Some teachers like to brag about it. But it really comes down to, why is this finding its way into our schools at all? What purpose does it serve? I know that the correct woke answer is, well, we have to look at the things that we did in the past that were bad. I don't disagree with that. But why do we have to reject everything we did that was good? See, that's the part they won't answer. It's like we're recrafting the entire image of this nation, and the 1619 Project, which was mentioned in that video, again, starts out with, oh, yeah, well, this was a nation that was founded on slavery. Was it really? I'm sorry, but the author of that 1619 Project is not exactly known as someone who is known for rigorous scholarship, and there's such an agenda at play here. So I don't think it's wrong to acknowledge things that took place in another time, that were solved in another time. But why are we obsessing over it today? I can only surmise that we're obsessing over this because it provides some kind of leverage. If we can get people feeling guilty, well, they're easier to manipulate. And then if they're easier to manipulate, it's easier to get them to believe whatever, especially when you're talking about students held captive in the classroom and subject to the authority of the teacher or whoever is telling them whatever it is that they have to believe. Sounds to me like a great way to indoctrinate people into some very dark ideology under the guise of, well, we're just trying to give them the whole truth. But they're not giving them the whole truth. They're giving them a pretty slanted left-wing version of the truth that doesn't exactly square with reality. Now, of course, the press soft pedals this kind of thing. And Dustin Hurst, I appreciate you calling out the bias of some of the news organizations. He points out KTVB did an article on Kendi speaking at BSU, but they have yet to do an article on Chloe Cole speaking in Caldwell in the Idaho Capitol. But he says, I'm sure Brian Holmes and Morgan Romero are working hard on it. I'm sure they're getting ready to talk about it. Now, if you don't know, Chloe Cole is she is an activist and someone who has been through that transgender journey. At age 15, she wanted to transition from female to male, and she actually had the surgery, the top surgery, to make that a reality. But a couple of years later, she realized that this was a mistake and transitioned back to being a girl, albeit with some permanent consequences. I mean, a double mastectomy is not something that just, it doesn't grow back. So she is an advocate now for those who are going through trans, identity crisis or that gender dysphoria, and advocating for them that let's not jump too quickly. And adults, this is the real thing. Adults should not be predatorily standing by, rubbing their hands, looking at what's a multi-billion-dollar-a-year industry and growing to try to shepherd these kids who have some momentary confusion, but do you really want to shepherd them into permanent solutions, hormone therapy and binding and top surgery and so forth for things that can't be fixed? Now, the press has been pretty quiet about the fact that she is coming to speak. And I hope that if you're in the Treasure Valley area, I hope you'll find the time to go. I know the tickets are going pretty quick, but it's very powerful when you hear from someone who's actually been through that journey. And the silence of the press, well, it's quite deafening. They really don't want to talk about it. In fact, we're supposed to pretend that this is just a good thing, and it's the kind of thing that needs to be taught to our kids. In fact, I'm going to show you a video clip, and bear with me. This one's kind of hard to watch, especially when you look at these. This is a video that was shown to daycare owners in North Carolina. A teacher using a doll to teach gender identity to 4- and 5-year-olds. And I want you to notice how happy these educators are when one of the kids brings up the term non-binary. What 4- or 5-year-old is going to go around, well, I know about non-binary. They're being force-fed this by some adult in their lives. Watch the video and tell me this is not manipulation of innocent young minds.
Berries. Today, I wanted to introduce you to a new friend in our class. Well, this, Huckleberries, is my friend Nash. It's their first day in our class. They're just looking around at all of you, and they're so curious to know who you all are.
Today was fun. It was really interesting, though, knowing going in, being like, I don't know what questions kiddos are going to have or what they're going to say, which is both like nerve-wracking, but also kind of exciting. It's that place of not knowing as a teacher and just being okay with that.
And the friend likes to ask the question, are you a boy or a girl? And Nash answers, I'm just a kid.
But kids can be boys or...
They can be boys or girls. Yeah.
Or maybe non-binary.
Yeah.
It was just like non-binary, yeah. That's just something that we know. And this is something, it's like, they're 4 and 5 years old, and they just didn't make a big deal out of being a boy or a girl.
And I think it was a huge testament to how much we've been talking about it in the classroom that you never mentioned the term non-binary. It was a child who brought that up because it's constantly in conversation.
Yeah, just like me. So Nash, just like me, is non-binary. So they aren't sure if they're a boy or a girl. So when people ask them, are you a boy or a girl? Right now they just feel like saying, I'm a kid. They're figuring it out.
Why does he like stars?
They like stars.
They like stars.
Yeah. And they are
why did
really...
he wear a star shirt?
They wore their star shirt because it's their favorite shirt, and because they were nervous today, they thought they would wear something that makes them feel special.
Wow. That's some straight up manipulation. And look, it's being done very tenderly and lovingly, but the kids, innocent little kids, recognize, oh, why is he wearing this? Or why does he like that? Or those kids aren't trying to be political, okay? This is something that's being introduced to them. It's not clearing up confusion for them and helping them better understand the world. It's introducing confusion into their lives for the purpose of what? To warp their minds, to confuse them, to introduce some kind of question that they're not prepared to answer. And of course, the teacher, they, correcting them every time they misgendered, poor Huckleberry. And then the kids reciting, chanting in unison. I mean, let's look at the attitude here. This is I think a tweet that sums up pretty well. Well, it doesn't happen, but it is happening, and it's good that it's happening, and you're a bigot for opposing it, and it should be illegal to criticize. When someone expresses concern, like parents did to the Caldwell School District a couple of weeks ago. By the way, did you know they canceled their latest hearing on gender policy in the school? Kind of crazy. But they said, well, again, this is safety issues, and we're going to play the victim here, but parents don't want their kids. And then we're talking high school kids and junior high kids. They don't want them being taught this garbage either. All right, and I have to share this one with you just because this one made me chuckle. Your face when you find out that recess is canceled because a bunch of men in dresses are coming to read you stories. His face says it all. But do you understand now why parents are so reticent to send their kids to school if this is the kind of thing that's going to be normalized? And I know school districts, and I've seen a couple of different stories come out in Idaho press, over the last couple of weeks. Well, there's a whole bunch. There's maybe a couple dozen school districts that have adopted gender policies, per the U.S. Department of Education or per, the Office of Civil Rights. So ostensibly the excuse is, well, we had to do this because otherwise we were in danger of some kind of a federal lawsuit. And actually, I'm sorry, I'll do this probably in Friday's show. I'm going to share with you some excerpts from a wonderful response from a legislator who answered that concern on behalf of Debbie Critchfield, who is the superintendent of Idaho's schools. Debbie Critchfield was like, well, we have an aggressive federal Office of Civil Rights, and, they want to make sure that our schools aren't discriminating, unfairly against these kids with gender issues. But this legislator says, well, this isn't just a matter of we have to bow for fear of an aggressive federal agency. This is something where parents need to be able to speak up and to assert themselves, and this is where right and wrong actually come into play, which kind of brings us to the subject of school choice. Can you imagine that stuff like this is what's helping to drive the school choice movement? Not everybody's ready to run for the exits, but enough people are realizing, wow, something has happened to our government school system. And I got to show you this rhetorical sleight of hand. This is the new mantra now. Public money is for public schools. But this needs a little bit of clarification. Whose money? Public money. Money appropriated from who? The public. Okay, which is the taxpayers who earned that money. So taxpayer money is for not public schools, government schools. This is false advertising, folks, man. This is a total blatant case of false advertising, man. It's taxpayer money is for government schools. That's what is being said. And by the way, this is playing out in more places than just Idaho. This is playing out in other states as well. Don't you think the taxpayers ought to have a say in where that money is being used? It's not about, we only can support one system, and the only system is the state-run or government-run system. If it's truly about education, then it ought to incorporate other options, other choices that may be of value to these parents and the taxpayers. But see, there's a systemic mindset that this system itself is so sacred that not only does it have to be fully funded, but it is the only thing that deserves any legitimacy, and anything outside of it is, on its face, illegitimate. In fact, here's what that looks like. This is from an Iowa school board member. The purpose of a public ed, meaning education, is not to teach kids what parents want. It is to teach them what society needs them to know. The client is not the parent, but the community. That is what collectivism looks like in the education establishment, plain and simple. Public education is not about giving parents what they need or what the kids even what they need. It's about teaching whatever the community wants them to know. The community being the collective, which we presume is always going to be, wise and noble. It takes a village to raise a child and all that. Thankfully, there are parents who are seeing beyond this. And thankfully, there are lawmakers in the various states who are starting to provide some options. But it's so funny to see the people who, in other areas of their lives would be very pro-choice. Well, of course, when it comes to a woman's right to choose, but when it comes to a parent's right to choose what is best for their child's education, there is a one-size-fits-all mentality. It's a handmaid's tale, albeit set in an educational setting, and your kids are the ones wearing the handmaid's uniform. All right. Speaking of kind of an interesting mindset, let's see what's on Jim Jones' mind. Oh boy, Jim's saying there's a cure for Idaho's extremist politics. It's called ranked choice voting. Now, he has some very specific concerns that he goes into here in which he talks about, well, we've got so many extremists that have come to power, and you have to understand the things that he's worried about is people who are concerned about their kids being taught CRT and gender identity stuff in school. Oh, that's extreme. Why don't they just shut up and let us pragmatic, people who know how to govern do our jobs? He's also concerned that there have been bills introduced that would restore freedom to people, to Idaho citizens and Idaho residents, including one bill in particular. I thought it was interesting. He says, they're trying to stop the ability to spread disease, or the ability to reduce the spread of disease. I can only assume that means these are bills or laws that would curtail the mindless authority that was being exercised when people and jobs were being declared non-essential and people were being, locked down, arrested, beaten, jailed for simply presuming to live their lives, which, by the way, had not been done before under pandemic situations. It threw a whole bunch of knowledge, 100 years or more of pandemic policy out the window to try something new. So, Jim, you're great at advocating for the people who want to exercise state power, but let's talk about the people who want to exercise freedom. And what he's suggesting here is, well, the way we keep these extremists out is we just open up the primary elections to anybody, all parties, all comers. Anybody can vote any way they want to, and that's ranked choice voting. And by flooding voters, I presume uninformed voters, into these primaries, we're going to keep these extremists, meaning people who actually understand the principles and practices of liberty, out of the equation. So I want to point you to something that Brandon Durst recently posted. He said, I just completed an empirical analysis of voting trends in Ada County between the 2022 primary and general elections. Now, the results are unsurprising, but greater insight into the extent that crossover voting has infected the Idaho GOP nomination process. What does he mean by crossover voting? That means Democrats pretended to be Republicans and went and voted in the Republican primary, knowing full well they're going to try to vote for the least conservative candidate possible. And then when the general election comes around, well, first of all, we're trying to keep the most conservative candidates out of that general election, but we're trying to stack the deck so that they can go back to voting Democratic in the general election. Brandon goes on to say a few highlights here. When taking voter affiliation into consideration, and he's talking about Ada County, Democrats overperformed in the general election by an average of nearly 43,000 votes per race. Conversely, Republicans underperformed by an average of nearly 13,000 votes per race. So what does that mean? Well, the Republican underperformance is even when you add votes from proxy conservative third-party candidates. So on average, Democrats not only got every single Democrat vote, but they also got 84% of all the unaffiliated votes. Wow, what a happy coincidence. And this is the thing that Jim Jones, among others, would like to see more of. Brandon Durst says, so what does this mean? Well, first of all, the crossover vote problem is huge. Most unaffiliated voters are, as most conservatives have guessed, Democrats in hiding. The numbers bear that out undeniably. So it's just simply a matter of numbers. If we can just get enough people, if we can fool enough people into voting, for the most statist candidate, we can keep those pesky extremists, by which we mean the ones who understand the proper role of government, the limits of legitimate government, from ever getting a toehold in the process. So what does it mean for you and me? It means that we can't sit back and just outsource, whatever legislating is taking place to our legislators. We have to be part of that process. And that means you need to be aware of what the bills are. You need to be in touch with your legislators. You need to start a support group. I'll give you an example of one. Magic Valley Liberty Alliance. They have regular meetings talking about the pending legislation, talking about how to contact legislators and how to make their influence felt. That is, after all, the essence of leadership. It's using your influence as wisely as you can, wherever you happen to be standing. So don't outsource it to other people. Don't trust your legislator's going to do the right thing. A lot of them will talk the talk. Oh, yes, I'm conservative. I'm a small government Republican. But when they get to the legislature, They govern like, like Governor Brad Little, like a big government politician who loves to spend other people's money. And by the way, gets a lot of accolades from his Democratic cohorts. Imagine that. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.